If you'll give me a hand with the questions when we get there, I'd appreciate that. I'll
Absolutely.
pick some spots here and we'll stop and try to grab those. For those of you who don't know, I'm Mark Polino, the Director of Client Services here at Fastpath. I've been working with Dynamics GP for 17 years, which is a really long time and a little scary to me. But I'm an MVP for Dynamics GP, and so I get to dig into all the dirty, nitty-gritty stuff that goes on in GP. And we're going to have some fun with some year-end stuff today. Before we get there, I've got a bunch of books around Dynamics GP and a couple more that are coming out next year. So, also Pact, my publisher, is running a $5 sale. So if any of these GP books are interesting to you, maybe you have an enemy and you'd like to give them a GP book just to annoy them, they are $5 at pactpub.com right now. So give folks a chance to go get a steal on those. All right, let's talk about GP and year-end security. So what auditors really want to know is that administrators understand their system and that they can demonstrate control of their system. So it's okay if there's a mistake or someone does something wrong, or maybe you missed something and it took a month or two to get it fixed. It's not perfection is the standard. It's that you actually understand how your system works and that you can demonstrate that you've got it under control. So we're going to look at a whole bunch of year-end security things here. We'll spend a few minutes talking about all of them and see if maybe we can find something fun along the way. So end of the year journal entries is a big one for me. As a controller, there's always a ton of journal entries that come in at the end of the year. And these are things like, you did accruals or deferrals, and for one reason or another, they changed throughout the year, and now you got to do some cleanup. Or maybe even though you set them up in Dynamics GP, the agreement changed at the end, or there's a couple of dollars left over, and you got to clean them out of an account. No big deal. This is also where people figure out that, we were depreciating land for 8 months. We should probably fix that. And so they'll go and fix that. And if they catch it late enough, they won't be able to fix it in fixed assets, and they'll just make an adjustment in the general ledger as a temporary fix and then fix it permanently in fixed assets after the first of the year. So there's lots and lots of entries that are being made at year end that are different from what you would see in a normal year. And the concern here is really around a couple of things. If someone has been doing something inappropriate, we'll say from a fraud standpoint, this is a great place to try to sneak in a journal entry to hide some of that, because there's a lot of things that are going through. More importantly, though, it's a time when the financial statements and the numbers are going to get set, and a lot of people have things that are tied to those financial statements. So, bonuses based on sales or returns or all of those other kinds of things that may affect people's pay. So it's not unusual to see the oddball requests, oh, this is really a sale, but I wanted the paperwork till tomorrow, so we need to get it in as a, we need to go ahead and accrue the sale in this year. Those kinds of numbers can really affect people's pay, so there's a lot of incentive to make those things happen before year end is done. So you really want to make sure that you've got control of journal entries that are being made in the system, that they're being reviewed, they're being authorized, and they really are appropriate. This is also a spot where a lot of folks are, the auditors are going to spend a lot of time looking at your year-end journal entries, wanting to make sure that the organization itself is not trying to manipulate their financial statements with changes being made in the last month. Ultimately, the lesson from this is if you're going to manipulate your financial statements, do it in October, not in December. At least I think that's the lesson. But there's actually some tools to help you out. So Dynamics GP does track a lot of information around journal entries specifically, specifically entries that originated as journal entries versus they started in sales and worked their way down. So GP will track the posted date, the modified date, the last user who modified this, and the user who posted. We kind of don't care about the user who created, because if some guy created a journal entry but 6 other people changed it, well, it's really that last person who could have made a change that is kind of our most important. It's what last modified user is supposed to do. And then optionally, if you're using approvals in GP, so there's kind of the old style approval where the approvals are done on journal entries. And then there's also workflow-based approval. So this is a bit newer. So a workflow-based approval means the journal entry won't actually get posted until it's gone through a workflow and one or more approvals are properly applied through the workflow. So those are available to control journal entry approvals as well. I'm not a big fan of GP's older style approval workflow, because when you turn it on, it actually turns it on for all journal entries, even those that originate someplace else in the system. So if they originate in sales or AP, they then stop in GL, and you've got to go and approve those as well. So I'm not a huge fan of that. Another way around this is really just to control posting. You can control posting in security and control who can post. And so ideally, folks who can post aren't folks who can also do transactions, and that helps a lot, so you're getting a bit of a review there. But there are some things in SmartList. Like I said, these are all available as part of journal entry reporting in SmartList, so you can get a whole lot of information about who created journal entries there. It's also sometimes helpful to have an auditing tool. Something like Audit Trail from Fastpath is just huge when you're trying to figure out who did what or who changed what. There are some settings in GP. You're going to set at year end the retained earnings account. You're going to validate that that's set correctly. You may choose to do that by to distribute retained earnings either for the whole company or by division, so there's some settings there. And with some of both the settings changes and the transactions, having an audit trail tool like Audit Trail from Fastpath in place makes it really easy to figure out who actually did what and what they changed. Last kind of short story around that, when I was a controller, we actually reopened the end of the year to make some final entries. Right before the financial statements went to our publicly traded parent for them to incorporate in the larger financial statements. And someone wasn't paying attention, and they posted a large number of payables transactions inappropriately, and it changed all of our financial numbers. They posted it in the wrong year, and it just blew out our numbers, and we were literally 2 hours from our deadline. There's no way we could have gone back and even voided all of those and confirmed everything. So what we did was we went and fixed that in SQL to move those postings into next year. We turned on Audit Trail before we did that. We fixed it all. We turned off Audit Trail. We printed the report of the changes that we made. We stuck it in a file, and when the auditors came in, we showed them the file, explained. It took about a minute and a half, and we were just done. So that was kind of a different use of Audit Trail, but it really, really saved our bacon around year end. Segregation of duties. So this is an important time of the year to look at segregation of duties. And by segregation of duties, I mean where an employee has access to more than one part of a process or transaction. So they can create customers and to generate refunds. Following segregation of duties, this is an important audit tool to those types of things from happening and to prevent people from changing financial statement information. Even if it's just a mistake, you really want more than one person looking at that and not someone just making an inappropriate journal entry. Maybe they add extra zeros or put the decimal in the wrong place, and suddenly your financial statements are off by a lot. Well, if they're able to do that without anybody looking at it, that starts to create a problem for you. Year-end is a great place to look at that because people's jobs and job descriptions may have changed. What they do, how you organize the department may have changed. So it's an important thing to consider at year-end, and it's also something that if you're audited, your auditors are going to be looking at. Ultimately, what you want to do is have a rule set of potential conflicts, like users can't create vendors and vouchers, or create vendors and cut checks. Identify what conflicts exist in your organization. So if you don't use inventory, if you're completely service-based, then a typical rule that controls inventory just doesn't apply to you, so you don't have to worry about it. But you want to identify where your conflicts are. Can you fix those via security? And if you can adjust security. And if not, can you fix them some other way? And by other way, it's called a mitigation, and typically you're talking about things like we have a review process in place, we have an approval with workflow, we have something else that is injected into this process so that this user who might have a segregation of duties conflict, we may feel that they need to be able to do these things, but we don't want them to be able to do them freely and without any intervention along the way. So maybe someone's able to create a vendor and a voucher, but there's a review on all vendor creations, there's a double check on vouchers and vendors prior to checks being cut or being sent out, those types of things. Ultimately, what you're trying to solve with segregation of duties is understand where your risks are at, understand what rules you have around what people are allowed to do and not to do, and then explain what you're doing, how you're using those rules to manage those risks. This is something that not just in GP but in other ERP systems, it's really, really hard to do without a third-party tool. The auditors all have great things about, you know, this is how conflicts or how segregation of duties, but then when you actually go to apply that to specific windows inside of GP and specific rules for what a person can do inside of GP, this is really, really hard to do without a third-party tool. Fastpath Assure does exactly that. We have a custom rule set for GP. It goes through, it finds segregation of duties conflicts, it identifies them for you. That way you can go fix security, or if you have a mitigation in place, you can actually note that mitigation, explain it, and be able to document that all the way through the tool. So this is one that is harder to do without a third-party tool. Another important piece at year-end is user security. Really what you're trying to define is who can do what. Honestly, you should be reviewing your security on a fairly regular basis. I would argue at least quarterly. But for some folks, they only do it twice a year. And if you haven't done it, then if you haven't done it yet this year, user security year-end is the place to look at that. Really what you're looking for is, do users have appropriate security for what we want them to be able to do? It's a common audit area. It's a place that auditors will spend a lot of time trying to understand what users can and can't do. GP does offer some security reports, so that's great. We actually have some of the other Dynamics products don't have built-in security reports out of the box, so it's great that GP has some. But there's an important piece that you need to understand. When you run these reports, so if an auditor says, I want to see who can make changes to vendors, and you run a report out of GP to show who has access to the vendor maintenance window, the vendor master table. If a user is set up as the SA user and anyone who is set up as a power user does not appear on those reports. SA and power user both have access to everything in the system. They don't have specific access. GP doesn't say you're allowed to do this and this and this. GP just says whatever you want to do, just go do it. So the reports are written to show anyone who has specific access where that box is checked for the vendor maintenance window. So if you tell an auditor, or you tell management, because sometimes it's management going, I want to know who has access to vendors because we've had a problem and we need to lock this down. If you just give them a list out of GP, you're going to be missing all of your SA users and your power users, or your SA user and your power users. So you really need to give them a list that says these are all of the users who can access this in GP, and this is the list of all of our power users who also have access, and then the SA user, anyone with the SA rights, they would be able to do this as well. That's a complete list. So what the auditors really want to know is that you understand how your security is set up and that there's some type of regular review. And by regular review, that is documentation and sign-off. My kids like to give me a hard time if I say something cool happened. They'll say, you know, pics or it didn't happen. Auditors feel the exact same way. We want documentation or it didn't happen. So you can't be like Snapchat. You can't say we did this cool thing, we reviewed our security, and 30 seconds later it disappeared forever. No, you actually have to document it, sign off that you did it, that type of thing. Part of our Sure tool, we talked about segregation of duties. There's also a huge part in there about helping people understand and review their security, including electronic sign-offs and things like that. All right, system administrator stuff. So Dynamics GP runs on SQL Server. The SA user is a built-in SQL Server system admin account. The problem with SA is if you have lots of people running around with the SA password and they do stuff in GP, it's impossible to tie this back to a specific user. So with Audit Trail, we can tell that it was done by SA, and we can even tie it back to the specific machine that was used. But we can't tell you that Bob or Mary is the one who logged in with the SA password. If half a dozen people have it, any one of them could have done it, and frankly, none of them will admit to doing something. It's just the way human nature works. SA also gives excessive permission. I've seen someone with too much permission accidentally delete their accounts receivable because they really didn't know what they were doing. It's pretty ugly when that happens, so you really want to limit both SA and power user permissions. We've actually got a great white paper on minimizing the use of SA. For Dynamics GP, the only thing that SA is required for anymore is to install Dynamics GP and install any other third-party applications, add additional Dynamics GP modules. It is not required to add users. We've got a whole nother white paper about how to deal with that. It is not required to do backups. There are ways around everything now. If you're running GP 2010 or older, there are a handful, like half a dozen things in the professional services tools that might require SA, but any versions beyond that, you should only need SA for creating or for actually installing things. When you're managing SA, you really want to carefully guard access to that password. You want to limit to, one user, 2 users, one user with the password in a safe somewhere kind of thing. If a consultant needs it for something that they're doing, if it's truly needed, change the SA password, give them the new password, change it back when they're done. Or give them the SA password, let them do their work, and then change it when they're done. I've seen both techniques work just fine. You just don't want to give that out. I know lots of consultants who are running around with companies' SA passwords. They have no intention to do anything malicious, but everybody agrees that that's a bad idea. Last thing with SA, don't use SA for service accounts. It's really tempting when you're plugging in something like, whether this is Power BI to make a connection or Smart Connect, which is used for integrating products, or for integrating data into GP. Any of those that connection into GP, you really don't want to use SA. It's great. It'll work every single time, but you're introducing a security hole through this product, and then when you actually want to change SA, you create the password, you create a giant problem for yourself because now you have that SA password in half a dozen places that you've completely forgotten exist, and you start to break things. All right, I'm going to take a break here for just a minute and see if we've got any questions hanging around in the queue.
Mark, I don't, oops, wait, we might have one, sorry. Oh, somebody just mentioned they missed the sale for the book, so Mark can show the slide at the end for the book sale for sure.
Sure, and it's PackedPub, it's PACKTPUB. .com. They're running the $5 book sale on all of their books, and I think it's now through Christmas or now through the end of the year. So go and buy all of your friends' GP books because they will love you for that. I said dripping sarcasm. All right, well, we'll move on. If we've got more questions, we'll take those in a minute. Power user is a lot like SA. It doesn't have quite the power, but it is excessive permission. Folks can accidentally break something. Security through obscurity and saying, oh, they'll never figure out how to drop tables or do those kinds of things is foolish. There's always someone in the organization who will say, what does this button do? And that can be a real problem. My favorite in GP, it's really simple and dumb, but if you turn on account security, it effectively blocks the chart of accounts and makes it look like the entire chart has been deleted. And it's a really easy fix. You just uncheck the box, but it's a really scary moment for a lot of people, and it can be a career-limiting move. And often that happens because someone has excessive access and they see that the security box is checked and that that account security is not. So, well, that security is good, more security must be better, so they check that box. Not a great idea, and the root cause really is excess permissions. For auditors, having too many power users can really be a sign of poorly designed security. We see it too. We see folks who want us to turn on audit trail for everything because they don't want to go through the hassle of fixing security, so they've made everybody a power user, and then they just want to audit everything and see what changes. That's really not the right way to do that, it's certainly not going to stop anything from going wrong. You might know who did it, but if they've wiped out all of your data and you don't have a good backup, it's really not going to matter much at that point. Let's talk about orphaned users. So orphaned users are GP users that no longer have access to the system. So typically these are users who have been terminated. Maybe they've had a job change, they've changed positions, and so they should no longer either have GP access or maybe back to kind of user access reviews, maybe they should have less access than what they have today. They used to be someone who processed transactions, and now they're a manager, so they should just be overseeing them. Folks who are on leave, this could be maternity, FMLA, you know, anything that basically they really shouldn't have access to GP anymore. Doesn't mean they're not necessarily an employee, but they really shouldn't have access to GP anymore. So in those cases, it's something that the auditors really are going to focus on. They're going to compare the list of GP users to the list of users on the network. And so if someone is inactive and they've left the organization either temporarily or permanently, or they're in a different role, they're going to find those things. The key here is really a notification process, some way to be able to notify and be able to say that this particular user's status has changed. When that happens, it typically initiates in HR. They've got to be able to communicate beyond, usually the network guys know because you want to turn off their email and remove them from the network, but that's not necessarily the case in a job change. And even then, we want to remove them from Dynamics GP. Just because they're removed from the network doesn't mean that maybe they don't know someone else's network password or that there's not some other mechanism to get into the network via a Citrix connection they have or something else. So really the best practice is to go ahead and at least disable or remove them from GP. We're seeing a bit of a discrepancy or difference of opinion among auditors. In some cases, the auditors want them to remain in GP but to be disabled so that when they see transactions with that user's name on it, they can confirm, okay, so this was a valid user and now they've been disabled. Other auditors want the user to be completely removed so that they can say there's no chance of this accidentally being turned on, or there's no chance of someone turning this user on because they know this user's password, and then they're able to do things without being discovered because now they're logged in as an orphaned user. I would say pick one, make an organizational decision, document that this is what we're going to do and why, and then if your auditors disagree, that's fine, you can make that change going forward, but they'd rather have you say this is what we're doing and why, and then have a discussion about whether that's what they want than for you to do nothing. We actually have a product called ConfigAD that does single sign-on, so your users aren't having to be managed between Active Directory and GP. Your users log in with their Active Directory logins. When they are deactivated, whether that's removed or disabled from Active Directory, then they also get, at your choice, disabled or removed from Dynamics GP. So you can pick how you want that behavior to work. But the nice thing is it helps eliminate orphaned users, certainly those who have left the organization or have been disactivated in Active Directory. And so then really what you're looking for after that is folks who might have a job change or something else along those lines. But it helps eliminate the vast majority of orphaned user issues, and it also gives you the benefit of single sign-on and some additional controls, like you can give people temporary access. So you could say this user has access in terms of leave. You know, if John goes on maternity leave and Mary's going to do his job for a month, you can actually give Mary elevated access or additional roles that she didn't otherwise have for a period of time. And then that expires automatically. ConfigAD will do that. It's not something that exists natively in GP. So fixing the notification process is important. And then a regular periodic review. This is the kind of thing that you just need to, as part of your user review, where you're looking at user permissions on a periodic basis, you need to do a check for orphaned users and just confirm that we don't have users who are not, you know, who have left the organization or who are not showing up at this point in time. Very first thing we talked about was control. Then auditors start to get a warm and fuzzy that, you know, maybe things are in pretty good shape. If you have a bunch of users in December who left the organization in February and you've not done anything about them, they're going to start digging to see if maybe there are transactions with that user's name on it after the time that they left the organization. If that's one of those, you've got a mess. But this goes a long way, controlling orphan users goes a long way toward proving that you have your system under control. All right, any questions at this point in time, Trish?
I'm looking for you. Yes, we do have a couple of questions.
All right.
The first one, oh wait, I think you answered my question. However, if you delete a terminated user ID, be gone from transactions.
No, the ID stays in transactions. So in GP, if it says posted by or last modified by, that stays in all of those transactions. They don't get wiped out from the table. But what you wouldn't know is you wouldn't know what security that user was supposed to have. So you wouldn't necessarily know whether they were supposed to have permissions to post. But again, that's one of those conversations you have with your auditor to see which they prefer. But they will stay in the tables.
Okay, perfect. The next one is in regards to orphaned users. When Active Directory marks a user as inactive or is deleted, what actually happens to the GP account?
So with ConfigAD, it's actually a setting. You would say when the user is removed from Active Directory, I want them disabled in GP. And so what happens is we have a service that monitors Active Directory, and when that user gets disabled or removed in Active Directory, the service sees that and it goes into GP. And if you said, I want to disable this user, then it marks that user as disabled. If you say, I want to delete this user, then it removes that user.
Perfect. And then the last question is, I've joined a company that had all users as power users, and I'm now going through the process of creating the proper access for each role. I'm finding that there are some items that are missing from the roles. For example, all-in-one view and purchasing. Is there any place to find a list of these missing task IDs, or at the least some of them, to reduce the panic from the users?
So I have a couple of recommendations around that. Items missing in roles are almost always the result of upgrades. And when you upgrade Dynamics GP, the new security pieces do not come with it. There's a separate SQL script that has to be run to make those items available, and then if they are included in roles, they get included at that point in time. If not, they're at least available to include in roles. What we strongly recommend is the roles in GP have lots of segregation of duties problems that we really recommend that you build roles from scratch as much as possible using the existing tasks. The tasks in GP tend to be really good, pretty clean. They'll get you 90% of what you want. And so that's a great place to start. We've also got a free Excel-based security matrix designed to help make it easier to build roles. I don't have the link handy, but we can certainly get that to you. Trish, I assume we have some way to get stuff to folks when we're done, and
Absolutely.
We can give you a link to that.
When we send the recording, we'll go ahead and add that link as well. So, and that was it for the questions.
All right. Something else that we see are really customizations in place of security. So instead of getting security right, maybe because people tried a couple of times and they couldn't figure it out, maybe they're doing other customizations anyway, so it's just simply easy to ask the partner developer, hey, can you adjust this so that users can't do this thing? Auditors really prefer that you get your security fixed instead of customizing the application. The reason is businesses change, organizations change, and so what maybe you wanted to prevent people from doing, now we want to allow them to do it, and you can't just flip a security switch. You have to go and undo a customization. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen people highly customize GP, and 6 months or a year later, they're undoing it all because they've entered a business that they swore they would never enter, and now they need all of that functionality that they've blocked off. And I've seen people do this for security reasons as well. You know, we don't want that, whatever a particular field is. So the other thing is this can really increase audit costs because now your customization that was written by someone is also a part of your security fabric because you've written it to keep people from doing something. So the auditors are going to want to dig deeper into that customization to ensure that it really does what you say it does. So if you say we have this customization and as part of that it prevents users from changing this field, they're going to want to dig into that code to make sure there's not something hiding in there that is a way around that. And that can be a problem in GP too, because often there's more than one way to access pieces of information. So the fact that you customized a particular window doesn't mean that a user can't get to that information another way to change it. All right, so your processes, the auditors really want to understand your processes. And by processes, you can think about this, how do I get from one end of a transaction to the other? How do I get from procurement or requisition to payment? How do I get from quote or order all the way to receiving cash? And this includes just even the sub pieces of that. How do I get from a vendor setup to a check for that vendor? What has to be done to make that happen? Really what the auditors want to know is that you understand your process. They'd really love to see it documented. This is how we set up, this is the process that we use to set up and approve a new vendor. This is our process for vendor address changes. Back to having your system under control. If there are holes in that process, then they will come back to you with the holes. But they're going to come back to you with the holes. They're going to be happy that you at least have a process and took a shot at it. Next year, they will slam you if you haven't filled the holes. But this year, they're going to say, great, here's your process. We have concerns about this part of the process, and we'd really prefer that you add a couple of pieces in here to make this work better. You can figure out with them how that makes sense from both like getting the job done standpoint and making your system work and be secure, because there's always a little tension between getting the work done and getting the work done securely. At that point, though, you're not sitting there saying, we don't have a process, it's wide open, anything could go wrong. You're saying, this is our process. They can test that, and they can come back and say, we think there's some problems here. We'd really like you to address that, rather than we're going to just test everything from beginning to end and hope you did stuff right. So they really want to see that you have your system under control. Documented processes go a long way toward that, especially documented processes around anything cash related. And to that note, if you don't have documented processes around cash handling, and actually if you have any very poor cash handling controls, we'd like to get your information, because I still have 2 kids in college and would like to maybe find a way to pay for that. Hopefully you know I'm kidding mostly. All right. What you want to do as you're looking at these things, maybe you've had a really bad year, you looked at your security and you said, man, we're really not doing a whole lot well. I have good news and bad news. The bad news is it's really too late to fix stuff for this year. If everybody's been a power user since January, there's nothing you are going to do to your security that is going to fix it for 2016. Everybody's been a power user all year long. You're going to have to say, hey, look, everybody was a power user all year long. But this is what we're doing to fix it next year. And so similar to the question, to be able to say, you know, look, everybody was a power user last year. Yeah, we know that's the wrong thing to do, but we did it. So this year, here's our security matrix. Here's where we're rebuilding security. Here's what we're doing to be able to lock that down. These are the types of things we're doing to be able to monitor what folks have. We think we'll have this in place by this day and this in place by this time of the year. And when you tackle those things, you want to take a risk-based approach. You want to pick on the high-risk stuff first. Certainly anything around cash coming in or going out, you want to tackle those controls and that security first. It really doesn't matter that someone can you know, change the birthday on a vendor if there's not a whole lot else that they can do to affect other controls or other pieces of a transaction. So you want to focus on the key areas and the key fields. You know, vendors, customers, anything cash related, cash receipts, payments, all of that. Banking, that's your first focus. So for example, we've had some folks want to tackle, we'll tackle journal entries and banking, that financial area, and then they'll move into AP, and then they'll shift over to AR. You can't get it all done at once, but honestly, every one of those steps that you take to make it better is a little better than everybody being power user. As we talked about before, any mitigations, reviews, this includes bank reconciliations, which is simply a form of review. They really need documentation and sign-off. So you can say that you did bank rec all you want, but if you can't actually produce a bank statement and a bank reconciliation, it's really tough to prove that you're doing bank recs. We don't see necessarily as many people sign off on bank rec because there is physical evidence. You can have a bank reconciliation printout from GP, and you can have a the actual performance of the bank reconciliation is the review. But for other things, if I'm reviewing that, yes, these people should have access to cut checks, the fact that you printed a report doesn't really prove that you did a review. So in that case, you're going to want to note that it was reviewed and sign off on it. If that sits around as a PDF that was signed off on, that's fine. All of our products can do electronic signatures, including electronic signatures from Outlook with our audit view tool. So, you know, that's an option as well, but you do want to document that you're doing it. So don't feel bad, even though it's too late to fix it. It's not too late to make a fresh start for next year. and be able to show what you're doing to make this better. All right, give me just a second here. We'll go back to the books in a minute if folks want that. Just to give you a quick rundown of what we do security audit and compliance for GP. Assure is all around security access reviews and segregation of duties. Audit Trail lets you monitor what's going on inside of GP, figure out what changed, the old outlook. Identity Manager and Config AD can work together. Config AD really is designed around single sign-on for GP, being able to manage security for GP outside of GP. So you could assign roles and other things without having to go into GP. That makes it easier to segregate. So someone who is setting security might not actually have security to do other things inside of GP. And then Identity Manager works with Config AD for user provisioning. This is really useful for things like orphaned users and new user setup. So essentially a user goes in and they say, we have a new employee, this is all of the specifics, we'll pull it out of Active Directory, say these are their specifics and we want them to have this access in GP. They send that off to a workflow. If all of the approvals happen, then the user just gets set up in GP automatically. No one else has to go and do that. If it doesn't get approved, then it doesn't go into GP. It's not just for new users though. If someone is terminated, you can go in, pull up that user, mark them as terminated. Now, generally, if you're using Config AD, then it just flows through and you don't even have to do that. But if you're not using Config AD in that way, and we do have a few who aren't, you could do the terminations. You could do also changes. So if someone changes roles, you could make those role adjustments through workflow, they get approved, and you are good to go. All right, we'll see if there's any last questions. I will run folks up to the books so that you can sort of see those. The Amazon link is on here. It's actually the publisher, Pact, P-A-C-K-T-P-U-B, so pactpub.com. They're the ones who are running the $5 sale if you're interested in that. Any other questions, Trish?
I do not see any questions in the queue at the moment, actually.
All right. For those on the line, we are planning first part of next year. We are already working on a webinar all around setting up GP users without using SA. So we're going to dig deep into that. We're going to show you exactly how to do it. So that'll be coming the first part of next year. We'll hope that you will look out for that. If you need that right away, reach out and we can show you how to do it. But some people want to be kind of walked through the process, and that's what we're going to do.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Mark, for a great session today. Again, we did